Okay, and we are live. So, hello everyone. I'm Greg Wyko, Chief of Staff of NATO Strategic Communication Center of Excellence here in Riga, and I would like to welcome you all in our last webinar before the summer break. Thank you all for joining us, so me and my guests through Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. So it's already summer, so I'm really grateful that you chose to join us for this discussion, to follow, to participate in our conversation. So over 2 months ago, we started with the webinars, with the first topic of COVID-19, digital security and privacy. So by then, Europe was in full lockdown. Everybody was exploring the new circumstances, and we thought if we can't meet you in person, we should try to meet you online. And thank you for your feedback. Thank you for being with us. And since we started, we discussed several burning issues about communication. It was about deepfakes. It was about international and national communication in the face of a pandemic. It was about disinformation or other influence activities driven by the state actors. And today we will also speak about communication, but a different kind of communication. So of course we will talk about words and images. We will talk about digital and traditional media. However, today it will have a different context. Today it will be a specific perspective. We will speak about how military force can be used for communication, how posture management can send a message to particular audiences, how lack of transparency communicates and actions, conflicting words deny credibility. So today we will speak about one of the Center's recent projects focused on Russian strategic exercises, its messages and implications. The report is almost ready. I believe it will be published in a couple of weeks. And today, for the first time, we will speak about some of its findings, publicly speak about some of its findings. And of course, we will talk to the authors. So that actually brings me to the introduction part. I'm joined here by three distinguished experts, Mr. Valeriy Akimenko from the Conflict Studies Research Center in the UK. For 2.5 decades, he covered political and military developments in the former Soviet space for the BBC Monitoring Service, specializing in Russian military, hard security, and power projection issues. Hello, Valeriy, good to have you with us.
Hello.
Dr. Vira Ratsiborynska is an Adjunct Professor on NATO and transatlantic approaches to security and global politics at the Vrije Universiteit Brussel. Her areas of research interest include the relations between the EU, NATO, and Eastern partners, Russia and Central Asia, in fields like energy, trade, geopolitics, border security, conflict management, and peacekeeping. Hello, Vira.
Hello.
And last but not least, my colleague from NATO StratCom Center of Excellence, Major Marius Varna, one of our leading experts on countering disinformation with long-lasting strategic communication experience gained in the armed forces of Lithuania. He worked as a communicator at all levels of the command and control system and led or participated in the planning and execution of national and international military exercises. Hi, Marius.
Hello, Greg.
So Marius, we met 7 years ago working actually on a military exercise here in Riga, 2013. So it was way before we joined the center. But now when I found out that you took over the project about comms aspect of military exercises, which level of transparency is usually far from what we are used to have in NATO, I was glad that you'll be able to combine the experiences as a communicator and exercise planners. But before I will give you the floor for introducing us to the project, let me just say a few words about what is going to happen for the next 1 hour. So first you will hear a short introduction given by our experts. It will be followed by a short discussion, and in the end, we will of course have the Q&A session, so the questions and answers. So in order to have a good Q&A session, I need some strong cues. So please take the comments section and post your questions if you have some. They will be sent to me, and I will try to go through all of them pending time, of course. So please post your questions in the comments section on Facebook or YouTube. So now I can only say, stay with us, click this like button and enjoy the conversation. So Marius, back to you. Please explain, the background of the project, the entire concept of the research. Over to you.
Okay, so thank you, Gregor. So first of all, of course, the exercises, particularly when they are at large scale, strategic level exercises, they of course create lots of attention from various audiences. And in this case, the exercises might be considered a certain form of the strategic messaging, because this is not only the demonstration of the nation's element of national military power, and how that power can be used in order to achieve certain political, geopolitical, or military goals. The exercises are also shaping and influencing certain target audiences which are relevant for that particular country. The target audiences, of course, vary from the adversaries, possible adversaries, allies, partners, as well as the domestic audiences. And of course, by showing the exercises, by communicating about the exercises, the activities, it sends not only certain messages, but the exercises can bring multiple desired effects and create favorable conditions for the further military actions. Similar situations we were witnessing in the past when, before the Russian-Georgian war and later followed Russian-Ukrainian war, Russia used exercises as A, to train the troops, and B, to concentrate the troops at certain locations. Later on, that was followed by the actions against a certain states. So based on that, the exercises that was caused the biggest headache and of course concerns for the Western hemisphere was Zapad 2017, when the eastern flank of the NATO allies countries, they start raising the questions about the lack of transparency, about the lack of openness that Russia was basically showing about those exercises. And of course, that was met with a huge concern. At the end of the day, right now, we have enhanced forward presence in the Baltic states. In this region, we have more exercises, so basically we're challenging to that. So that was the initial idea why some nations asked NATO Strategic Communication Center of Excellence to dive into that topic, to look how Russia is communicating its major strategic exercises, which target audiences we can have from such communication, and what conclusions can we drag to ourselves and to our domestic audiences as well. So of course I was really happy to take over this project because, just as you stated, I have experience in planning NATO exercises, how NATO exercises, how my country Lithuania is exercising and communicating about the exercises. So that was interesting challenge for me. I do believe that the final report will be interesting to read for those who are interested in Russian affairs, who are interested in the Russian communication strategic messaging, as well as to the Russian military affairs. So the way how we, as the center, have designed the whole project was, we wanted to look how Russia is communicating about the exercises. So we looked at publicly available communication, how the top leadership of the Russian Federation was communicating about the exercises, about the future activities, about the ongoing activities, about the scenarios that they're using for those exercises. We also wanted to match whether the activities on the ground, in the air, as well as on the sea are matching that communication. If there is mismatch between the activities and the communications, of course, ask ourselves, so what is behind that? Is Russia trying to hide something? Is Russia trying to basically to avoid certain attention on certain activities or certain topics? And of course, drag the conclusions. And as this report shows, we believe, at least the experts believe, that in some cases, the level of transparency was pretty high, but in other cases, there was a lack of transparency. And of course, the master messages, the main messages, the strategic communication about the exercises was varying between the exercises. So this study is about the three exercises. Vostok 2018, the Russia advertised those exercises as the largest ever exercises in the modern Russian history, involving about 300,000 troops, enormous amount of military vehicles, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, planes, ships, and so on and so forth. So this is already a huge message to potential adversaries. In 2019, we looked at the exercises, Tsentr 2019, and these exercises were meant to convey the message that Russia has a number of allies that they are trusting, they're exercising, and they're capable to basically defend certain regions, in this case, the Central Asia region. But nevertheless, parallel to these exercises, another exercises were taking place, and I'm talking about the Russian, Belarusian, also traditional exercises, Shit-Soyuza, or translate to English, the Union Shield. And the tricky thing is that Russia was not emphasizing those exercising. And as this report eventually concludes, that there was a connection between those exercises, and one of the exercises was used as basically to distract the attention from the things which Russia was trying to test, to check, and basically to avoid unnecessary publicity and avoid unnecessary, from the Russian point of view, visit from the international partners. I'm talking about the international treaties where the large-scale exercises should be open to the foreign observers, just to show that it's transparent, it's open, and Russia is exercising its military affairs. To add to that, the third exercises was also included in this report, and the reason for that exercises was because that was unprecedented openness about one of the major Russian exercises, and I'm talking about the nuclear exercises, Grom 2019. So the fact that Russia is always relying on the nuclear capabilities, but they do not speak that much about the employment, how they're exercising, and what kind of scenarios they're using to test those capabilities. 2019 was completely different case, because Russia was openly talking about that. They gave the scenario, they announced the activities, but nevertheless, once again, we saw some discrepancies between the official communication, between the actions on the ground, and, as the report concludes, some discrepancies between the nuclear doctrine that Russia is using as the background for its defensive capabilities, to the activities which were exercised and tested during these Grom 2019 exercises. So that's why I believe the topic is really relevant, just to see how Russia is communicating its major exercises, major capabilities. And I do hope that the final paper will be interesting to read for those who are interested into Russian military affairs. So, Greg, back to you.
Thank you, Marius. One follow-up question. So you mentioned sometimes higher level of transparency. So what's the difference? How would you compare it? So where is, openness that brings ambiguity versus full transparency? How would you describe this aspect?
Well, of course, strategic exercises involve huge number of troops, huge number of equipment used during the exercises. And in this case, international treaties are stepping in just to show transparency and openness. The most famous, of course, are Open Sky Treaty, where when the countries are allowing to execute flyover over the certain areas of the military installation or the exercises, as well as the Vienna document. But those documents are clearly stating the threshold when the countries are obliged to invite the foreign observers, so the foreign observers would physically see and conclude that yes, the exercises are transparent, the exercises are not posing any threat for any third country. But as this report concludes, it seems that the Russian Federation was playing with those numbers. If we talk about Vienna document, so the benchmark is 13,000 troops, but at least for two exercises that were taking place on the European continent, the publicly announced number of the troops was just a little bit below that number, and I'm talking about 12,950 troops. So these kinds of messages brings us to basically to the question whether it was transparent enough so other nations can conclude that yes, the Russia is exercising and Russia has full right to exercise, to test the forces, but if that benchmark is above certain international agreements, and Russia signed those agreements as well, then why they are not implementing that in force? And our conclusions from the open sources indicate that the number of troops involved into those exercises were far more higher than officially announced by the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Marius. Vira, you've looked at the information environment around the exercises, at the official messaging, at the messaging as overall. So please share with us your findings.
Thank you so much for invitation. So pleasure to be here and pleasure to work with such a great team. It's really fascinating and we did really well. And of course, it's a combined effort of many distinguished scholars. So if we look at Vostok and Tsentr, we see lots of messages. And of course, we need to pay attention to this overlap between doctrinal approach and activities on the ground, and also messages. As we see, information is used sometimes as a tool, and Russia also uses it as domain of operation. And also we see sometimes as a target to influence certain, for example, Western audiences, or even local populations. So what did we see in Vostok and Tsentr? Of course, it's a lot of messages, and we just go through main findings. And of course, I encourage everybody to read this study when it will be released. So when we go through main messages, and already Marius mentioned that Vostok was the largest exercise, and 300,000 troops participating. That's quite big. So we need to know that, of course, it's important to understand that in order to conduct such exercise, we need to also prepare everything on the ground, and of course it involves lots of preparation. So when we think about Vostok, we see this show of force, and Russia was demonstrated it very well. And also another message was emphasis on improved warfare capabilities, because what we see starting from 2008 to 2009, Russia was going through this reform to improve military capabilities, and we see certain impact on in already certain aspects of this in the Vostok exercise. So I just overview, because of course I'm not going to go through all operational and tactical considerations, but just overview that Russia tested certain new concepts on operational and tactical level. And what we see, for example, execution of the electronic warfare strikes, so that was important for Russia. And already in Zapad 2017, Russia was testing, for example, Belina, and it allows to boost certain speed of action, so that is important to test this electronic warfare capability. So Russia was doing it during Vostok 2018, and also attention was paid to command control and communication system, of course, and the National Defense Management Center was added to joint strategic commands, operational commands, and tactical units. So then another element was a new mobilization and reserve system, which was tested as a new element. So we saw that there was a certain lack of information on this. So we don't know exactly if objectives were achieved at the end or not in terms of mobilization, but we know that for Russia it's really important. A strategic deployment, mobilization is something that Russia is working on. So what we see in general when you look at this messaging, it's a show of force, of course, to reconfirm Russia's status as a global power, and also, of course, to improve this, to show this emphasis on improved warfare capabilities. So what we see increased quantity of troops, quality of Russian military. So when we look at messaging, we saw many messages that were describing Russian military, and of course Russian military an image as mobile, modern, credible, and efficient military. And of course attention was paid to modernization So we also saw increased scope of the exercise, so involvement of interior minister, national guards, and so on. So we saw the demonstration of advanced capabilities to shape our European information environment. And when we look at geopolitical messages, because of course military messages there are many, and encourage audience to read our report, because we go into some deep discussion regarding operational and tactical level. So when we look at geopolitical messages, we saw that Vostok was important exercise, because Russia demonstrated this deepening strategic partnership with China and also Mongolia. So that was an important message to international audience, that Russia is not isolated, and of course Russia can conduct this exercise, largest exercise with China and Mongolia. So in terms of power projection, also there was a message to the West that Russia this power projection is important, and they can do it with Mongolia and China. And also there was a message to local audience, because Russia was threatening this image of global power, and of course it was important to show force to local population. So when we go to Tsentr, because as Marius mentioned already some key funding, we saw that with so many also operational tactical involvement. So when we look at, for example, scenario was complex, it was hybrid scenario, and Russia was testing and practicing this counter-terrorism operations, so defensive actions in combined arms warfare. So that was a hybrid scenario, and Russia also illustrated capacity to incorporate lessons learned from tactics of ISIS in Syria and Iraq, and Taliban tactics in Afghanistan into military exercise. The scenario was complex, also a capacity to incorporate lessons learned. It was also level of complexity grew, and what we saw is that some new warfare concepts were tested. So, for example, reconnaissance strike frame, reconnaissance fire system. For those who are interested in military and to go to understand better, you can read all of this information in the report. Important point was also to test capabilities across multiple domains, so including electronic warfare, drones, and cyber. And also in Tsentr exercise, Russia was establishing network-centric system and transforming it into system of common control, reconnaissance, information communications computers. So that was really important. And Russia was unifying reconnaissance and intelligence with command and control in this hub of a National Defense Management Center, and this center was created in 2014. So we still also that Russia was exercising on two fronts. So as Marius mentioned, it was simultaneously coordinated two operations. So one exercise Tsentr, another one Union Shield. So what we saw in the main messages that, for example, Belarusian armed forces were fully integrated into Russia's command control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So we saw this interoperability with the armed forces of allies. And in terms of geopolitical messages, so Russia was exercising with Central Asia states and also with India, China, and Pakistan. So it was important to show this strengthening international partnership with China and Central Asian states and Belarus. And also we saw this internalization of the exercise. So there was an official emblem for the Tsentr exercise, and it was also designed with the flags of the participating countries. It was similar to what we see in the NATO exercise emblems. So we see all these messages, and of course we divided them with military messages, geopolitical messages. So we see that scenario was complex in the center, that there is also show force, improve warfare capabilities, and there were different messages to the West in terms of geopolitical implications. So we see that Russia is adapting, and of course we see progress in terms of military capabilities from 2009 till now. So I conclude on this, and if there are some questions, it will be a pleasure to answer.
Thank you, Vira. If I would ask you to briefly describe the main communicator in the context of those two strategic military exercises, is it the leadership? Is it the military force, or maybe media people? Who would you describe as the main communicator? So the entity that is bringing forward the message.
So we saw coordinated effort between different sources. So of course, we looked at, for example, Ministry of Defense. We looked at open source information from leadership, so how it was portrayed. Also, of course, there were certain elements where, for example, we analyzed certain channels, official channels, and we saw that, for example, official channels, TV channels, and of course media. And we looked at Russian media, Russian open source, and we analyzed all these communications, and there were many. So we divided, actually explained methodology. So we divided all of this, like looked at military messaging, political, geopolitical messages, and we analyzed all this open source information, combined it with analytics into writing. So it was a good combined effort.
Thank you for that clarification, Vira. Valeriy, so what was so significant and unexpected with our third case study? So if you could briefly guide us through the Grom 19.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. Please excuse the domestic environment. Many of us in the current climate have to work from home, so there we have it. Yes, just a few words about the importance of Grom as a strategic communications phenomenon. My intention today is not to retell the main points of the study. The details will be found there, that's fine. But simply to focus on the communications aspect of the exercise slightly beyond it. I won't couch it in academic terms. It will be not a lecture, but a talk, shall we say. So, by way of a small preamble, please allow me to say that nuclear is a world of complexity, secrecy, opacity, ambiguity, and even confusion. Sometimes it necessitates interpretation rather than statement of fact, and sometimes it is fraught by association with the danger of misinterpretation. So please do not shoot the messenger if that occurs. And even that sentence of mine about the messenger is ambiguous enough to mean either myself as the compiler of that study, or, for example, the Russian Ministry of Defense as another form of message and another form of messenger, given the sometimes incomplete picture that emerges. So to investigate this point further, i.e. to focus on the communications aspect of Grom, I'd like to start with a look at really the operation of Russia's military messaging machine in the context of Grom. First of all, what struck me and many other observers of the Russian military in the context of Grom was the unprecedented really level of publicity attached to the preview of the exercise and the holding of the exercise itself. Two events stand out. Number one is a briefing for foreign military attaches in Moscow on October the 14th, 2019, presided over by General Evgeny Ilyin, a spokesman for the Russian military. And the second event is an overview of the exercise itself in the form of a statement or news release by the Russian Ministry of Defense on October the 17th for the same year. At the briefing, General Ilyin invoked the spirit of openness. He talked about the briefing being a goodwill gesture on the part of the Russian Federation, as Russia was now under no obligation to provide this kind of information about this kind of exercise. No treaty called for the provision of such information. And as such an invocation of openness and a relative openness on the part of the Russian military is, of course, to be welcome. But as an aside, perhaps I could mention that all in all, it could be seen that complete openness does not come easily or naturally to the Russian military, or perhaps any military for that matter. For example, on October the 14th, during the briefing, General Ilyin provided a general outline of what is to take place, such as the fact that a ground-based ICBM will be launched, 3 submarine-launched ballistic missiles will be test-fired, and a total of, I think, if memory serves, 46 ballistic and cruise missiles will be launched during the exercise, Grom 2019. However, I think both a degree of greater technical clarity and certainly a degree of conceptual clarity would have been welcomed in the statement by General Ilyin. For example, the statement as related by the official website of the Russian military spoke about the scenario of the exercise, and the wording was that as conflict potential persists along the borders of the Russian Federation, the situation escalates and the exercise takes place in that scenario. Now, that was quite ambiguous in itself, and a similar degree of ambiguity was present in the provision of technical detail to do with the exercise. So, for example, on October the 17th, the Russian Defense Ministry gave greater detail about what has taken place, i.e. what particular missiles have been launched, the fact that President Vladimir Putin presided over the launching of these strategic missiles in his capacity as Commander-in-Chief, and notably also the fact that 2 other varieties of deterrent weaponry have been used, namely the Iskander, ground-launched ballistic and cruise missile, and the Kalibr, sea-launched cruise missile category. But once again, the precise nature of what had been involved, especially in the latter category, the Iskanders and the Kalibrs, was not really there, and perhaps it would have been helpful had it been there to provide greater clarity. But there we have it. Moving on, nevertheless, despite what could be arguably described as a relative opacity of the whole thing, some key takeaways could be arrived at. Number one is that, as stated officially by the Russian military, it was the defensive nature of the whole undertaking, the defensive nature of Grom. The message was taken up by the state media of the Russian Federation and was reinforced in numerous reports, both on TV, in the media, and so on and so forth. So that's one thing, the defensive nature of the exercise as conveyed officially by the Russian military. The second takeaway is that the degree of openness, once again, was, and the degree of publicity attached to the exercise, was not for the sake of openness itself, but was in a way, as it seemed, a means to attract attention to it, to say, to be conversational about it. Look at what we can do with a massive inventory of strategic deterrent arms. And indeed, a lot can be done. Coupled with other Russian activities, for example, in Syria, in the Mediterranean, it was a kind of almost a riposte to what President Obama once said, that Russia is a regional power. In fact, the message conveyed by the exercise was, hang on a minute, not at all, look at us, we are a nuclear superpower. An important takeaway from the whole thing. That is really borne out by both the scale of the exercise and the scope of the exercise, not just by the degree of publicity attached to it. So I think the consensus, the academic consensus about the exercise was that it was the largest nuclear forces exercise since the demise of the Soviet Union in the Russian Federation. Some say that the name Grom, i.e. thunder, had been used before. I have monitored the Russian military quite a while, a decade and a half. I have never heard that name mentioned prior to 2019. To be sure, prior to 2019, on an annual basis, around October, an ICBM, sometimes more than one, would be launched, but never to such a degree of fanfare, if you wish, with such a degree of publicity, as was the case with Grom 2019. In addition, what made that exercise unique compared to previous years was the involvement of, as I have already said, two additional elements of the Russian arsenal: the Kalibr, the sea-launched cruise missile, and the Iskander, the ground-launched ballistic and cruise missile. On October the 17th, going back to the statement by the Russian military, it was specifically mentioned that Kalibr cruise missiles had been launched. Quite unusual in various contexts. So there you are. To, I suppose, put things into perspective to illustrate the scale of that exercise and the message that sought to convey, the involvement of Russia's strategic arms and what could be described as sub-strategic deterrent weapons would be something like the United States practicing or testing the use of its Minuteman ICBM force, of its Trident submarine launched force, of its Tomahawk nuclear capability, if it still exists, and even perhaps the testing of its tactical freefall nuclear bombs. That was really the scale of the Russian exercise in Grom 2019 context. It was quite remarkable. One thing to notice about it is that the description of the exercise by the Russian military was a strategic deterrent exercise. So not purely nuclear deterrent exercise, which is how it was built by most sources in the West, but a strategic deterrent exercise. Now, that could imply a greater role in Russia's deterrence attached to non-nuclear weapons. And we know that the Kalibr and the Iskander have on many occasions before been said to be nuclear capable. So there once again lies a conundrum, as it were, and the greater degree of opacity. Which was it? Was it that the nuclear capability had been tested across the board, including strategic arms, sub-strategic weapons, and so forth? Was indeed greater provision made for non-nuclear strategic deterrence? And if I may return to this point once again, it is to overcome this opacity that greater clarity would have really been useful. Without such clarity, confusion persists. We really don't know what it is. Sometimes some people have remarked on the situation in terms such as that Russia's deterrence language is in danger of becoming confused. Perhaps they have a point. So be that as it may, that was an important takeaway. And the third important takeaway perhaps is that several subplots could be observed during Grom 2019. For example, Russia's practicing of what appeared to be quite an extensive escalation scenario from the use of, let us say, the Iskander and the Kalibr, all the way to what appeared to be, if you wish, all-out warfare on the nuclear front, the strategic arms involved. And once again, some facts are quite suggestive. So, for example, in the exercise, most of the ICBM force have been involved in some capacity, and the whole of Russia's nuclear triad, including the Air Force and the Navy, have been involved in that. And briefly to touch on two other points, in conclusion, I would like to remark on what in my view is the fact that this exercise is just an element in a continuum of Russia's strategic messaging through exercise. We know that in 2019, 5 ICBMs were test-fired, several submarine launched ballistic missiles, the same. The Bolivar, Russia's latest addition to the submarine launched ballistic force, had been fired twice, at least on the 24th of August and the 29th of October, which coincided with the launch of the United States' own Global Thunder nuclear command and control exercise, by the way, so an interesting correlation there. And since then, we know that President Putin himself was present aboard a Russian missile cruiser off Crimea in early January, January the 9th, I think, to witness the launching of two other elements of Russia's deterrent weaponry. The Kinzhal, an air ballistic missile, and once again the Kalibr from some ships off Crimea. And third and final point I would like to say is that this Grom exercise was also an element in the continuum of nuclear messaging by the Russian Federation in a much broader context, rather than just military exercising. So one example is the publication in early June of the fundamentals of Russia's nuclear deterrent policy, revealed for the first time as a public document. It was quite telling and was obviously yet another message to signal certain aspects of Russia's nuclear deterrent policy to the West. Another element of that continuum, if you wish, of Russia's nuclear signaling and messaging is perhaps the nuclear narrative in Russian society as a whole, including the Russian media, will remember the infamous statement by one of Russian state TV's anchors, Dmitry Kiselov, that Russia is the only country that could turn the United States into radioactive ash. That's a perfect example of what I mean. Yet another element of that continuum is perhaps leadership statements from Vladimir Putin down on nuclear subjects. Yet another perhaps is what has been reported as Russia's direct nuclear threats to maybe NATO officials, maybe officials in the United States, including General Mattis at one point, reportedly. Yet another point is perhaps Russian society's general militarization, which anecdotal evidence suggests is actively underway. And perhaps the final point to remark on is another kind of signaling implied by Russia's overall nuclear capabilities, not just strategic nuclear arms, about which we know quite a lot from Mr. Putin himself, things like the Avangard, hypersonic light vehicle, Sarmat KV-ICBM, Burevestnik nuclear-powered nuclear-armed cruise missile, and Poseidon underwater nuclear-powered nuclear-armed drone. So we know that Russia is working on an array of strategic nuclear arms, but it also has quite a capable non-strategic nuclear weapons arsenal, and perhaps some work is also in progress on that element of Russia's nuclear weapons. Something to bear in mind. You know, forewarned is forearmed. And with that, back to you.
Thank you very much, Valery, for this explanation. Let's dive into questions. So, can I ask you to speak about audiences? Because from what you've said, I understood that there are particular audiences in main focus. So we have the domestic audience, we have the international audience, we have the leadership, both domestic and international. We have the experts. So what would be your comment on how would you structure the main audiences for messaging through strategic exercises like Tsentr or Vostok? Marius, maybe we can start with you.
Thank you, Greg. So all those exercises, of course, they're designed, the communication is designed the way to reach certain target audiences, and the communication is designed a bit differently. In general, if we speak about the own audiences, of course, Russia is trying to convey the message that it has enough military power to defend itself from any potential outside threat. The messagings and the communication to the experts community, they differ a bit. These messages contain a bit more specific information, a bit more specific data about the equipment, about the tactics, about the operations that were taking place, simply because those experts later act as the boosters, as the continuation of the communication on certain levels. The messaging for the outside world, outside Russia, sometimes they not contradict, but they differ from the official messaging for the domestic audiences. But once again, the target is the same, to influence certain target audiences outside the Russian Federation, to shape their perceptions about who Russia is, what capabilities it possesses, and how those capabilities might be used. And of course, the top leadership messaging is sometimes used just to convey the message that do not mess with Russia around, because Russia is still formidable military power, geopolitical military power, and of course the world top leadership has always keep in mind that Russia is one of those key decision makers in the world's politics, and it has enough military powers for its power projection. Over to you.
Thanks, Marius. So, Vira, are we witnessing a carefully crafted communication tailored to particular target audiences, or it's rather a clumsy approach that actually is shown by different messages sent to other people?
Very good question. So as we analyzed all these exercises, so Vostok, Tsentr, Grom, what we saw several trends. So first trend was that Russia is not communicating so much of its technical challenges, difficulties as it was before. So we see that there is a certain element where Russia is not communicating all these technical difficulties or challenges that Russia is facing in its exercises. So there is not so much information. And second point, of course, that when we look at, for example, selective messages, we see that in, for example, in Tsentr and in Vostok exercise, we saw that certain messages were just not communicating. So at the beginning of exercise, for example, in Tsentr, we saw that there was some message appearing about Arctic, about paratroop expedition, but then it was not confirmed. Then again, in Vostok, we saw regarding this mobilization element, not confirmed regarding objectives. And then, so we saw that this trend that it can be that messages were quite selective and coordinated.
Valeriy, so Grom is a special exercise. Does it have a special audience?
Yes, I think it's fair to say that it does. And I think one aspect, one angle from which it could be looked at is the situation with international arms control, which is increasingly being described and in fact is eroding. We know that the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty collapsed as the United States withdrew and Russia followed suit. Russia had blamed, as we know. Another treaty that is uncertain at the moment is the New START, due to expire in February 2021. Once again, the situation with whether it is to be extended, whether by another 5 years or by a lesser term, is highly uncertain. Russia is sending positive signals. The United States is also willing to negotiate, although originally it wanted to involve China. But from that standpoint, I think it's fair to assume that those with an interest in whether to continue with arms control or whether to discontinue the whole regime are, it is fair to say, a target audience in their own right. Through Grom, I think it's fair to assume Russia wanted to restate its status as a nuclear superpower, if any mistake did. I think it's also fair to assume that through Grom, Russia wanted to say that we are all right, even if arms control were to collapse completely. We have an array of capabilities to address each of the requirements, both strategically and sub-strategically. So I think that was probably one of the audiences for Grom. In that context, of course, it is primarily the United States as the holder of a nuclear arsenal strategically comparable with that of Russia. But given the involvement of other weapons systems, such as the Iskander, the Kaliber, and so on and so forth, I think it's also fair to say that NATO partners could also be perceived as a target audience.
Thank you, Valeriy. We still have 10 minutes, so let's dive into questions that were sent to us through Facebook or YouTube. So the first one, does Russia change communication during exercises, or it's always pre-planned? So what do you think? Vira?
So as we discussed and we analyzed in the paper, we saw that certain messages were coordinated and selective, and we don't see really confirmation on certain objectives, because of course when we look at messaging, we look at messages before exercise, during exercise, after exercise. So we didn't see this continuity of repetition of messages. So sometimes it was not confirmed what was done before, for example, beginning of exercise. So we could say that some messages were pre-planned, especially when we look at, for example, messages to domestic audiences when Russia wanted to justify its actions in terms of military spending, modernization effort, and capabilities modernization efforts. So we discussed all this in papers. So when we analyzed all these messages, we came to the conclusion that it could be that messages were coordinated, some messages were selective and pre-planned. So that what we came as key finding in our conclusion.
Thank you. Valeriy, would you have something to add?
Yes, I could perhaps add something along these lines, and that is to say that there can be subtle changes in Russia's communications about exercises in general, but in the case of Grom in particular, it could be seen in one example. For example, at the initial event on October the 14th, 3 submarine launched ballistic missile launches were previewed. One, a so-called Sineva, a later version of a submarine launched ballistic weapon, and 2 launches of an older category of submarine launched ballistic missile by the name of, by the abbreviation of RSM-50. So it was said on October the 14th that 2 RSM-50s would be launched from an older ballistic missile submarine. It was quite specific. Suddenly on October the 17th, that quite precise technical formulation or announcement became somewhat more abstract, and the formula went something like, oh yes, we launched an ICBM from ground-based launcher, and some submarine launched ballistic missiles. No specific number was attached. Of course, the reason for that, as it transpired in between or somewhat later, was that one of the 2 RSM-50 SLBM launches had to be aborted for technical reasons, something to do with some system aboard either the missile or the boat, which explained the subtle changing of the communication that emanated from the Russian Ministry of Defense. Whereas initially it was quite specific, 3 SLBMs, later it became something amorphous. SLBMs. It's just one example of how change could take place.
Thank you, Valeriy. Marius, the next question is very much a COE question, so I have to ask it to you. How will exercise communication change in the future? So what is the impact of AI or other factors on the communication about the exercises, around the exercises, communications done by the exercises?
Well, I do hope that this is the question about the Russian. Of course, we do not know how the Russia is going to construct the communication about its next major strategic exercises, but we do hope that Russia will maintain certain level of openness. Of course, we would like to have them as open, as transparent as possible, but you never know. And the next exercise that is going to take place, of course, this year, that's going to be in Caucasus, and we will see if the Russia is maintaining its communication activities, if it's transparent, if actions matches the words, and then we will see that.
Thank you, Marius. So we still have 5 minutes, and I need to ask this question because there is one magical number appearing in the report. I had the pleasure of reading it, and there is this one number, 12,950. And could you explain the background of this number and why it's so significant for the communication behind the exercises? Marius.
Since we're talking about the transparency and international treaties are taking place over here, Vienna document, which basically challenges and encourages the participating nations to invite foreign observers, clearly shows that the exercises which are involving troops above the 13,000 should allow international observers. So in this case, Russia is using that magical number. And this is, when you look at the number of the participant, 15,000, so 50 soldiers is just, a needle in the haystack. That brings us to the conclusion that Russia is not that transparent as it tries to basically maintain, and the communication about the exercises and the activities that are taking place during the exercises should be understood only reading the Russian media sources, or at least Russia's messaging. So that's why that number is so emphasized in this report.
Vira, what do you think about this number? So is playing with threshold of 13,000 actually really effective in the information environment? Can be seen as effective? Is it like clumsy communication, or is it a real attempt to hide something? I think using the number 12,950 sends a message, a clear message. We are not transparent. What do you think about that?
So I agree with Marius, and I think that it's important to be transparent, especially as we need to understand Russia better and communicate better. So when we look at NATO approach, dual track approach, we need to understand that we would like to have this transparency and openness from Russian side, and we believe that it will be very good for the West as well.
Thank you very much. We have last 2.5 minutes, so I would like to ask you to give one sentence, like the main takeaway from this report, from this study. If you were asked about this one main takeaway, what would it be? Valeriy, can I ask you first?
Yes, I suppose that one takeaway from the study, as I look back over it, is, and I'm sorry once again to focus on the nuclear aspect of the whole thing. My one takeaway would be echoing both Vira and Marius about the importance of communication and transparent communication. As a recent, well, a freshly published book, including by William J. Perry, President Clinton's Secretary of Defense, remarks, nuclear weapons are a fact of life, both sides possess them, and the fate of the world in a way is in our hands as to how our destiny will unfold. So the importance of communication and maximum transparency for the prevention of accidents, or for the prevention of accidental mishaps, is, I think, my takeaway.
Thank you very much, Vira.
So better understanding and, of course, partnership and trust, and in total we saw this increased scale and scope of exercises. We need to pay attention to this in the future.
Thank you. And Marius?
Well, of course, intelligence communities, they know far more about the exercises because they use different approaches to collect the information, and of course that information is being provided to the top leadership for the decision makers. But for the general audiences, unfortunately, Russia is not as transparent as we would like to have, and of course communication about the exercises, the way how the strategic messaging is being constructed, it does not show that level of transparency, and then that's why the West remain concerned about Russia's activities, and of course that's why we, living in this part of the world, we are asking and encouraging our allied partners to be present in this part of the world with a military presence, for the exercises, for the other military activities, just to make sure that our populations are not affected by, as Vira said, any incidents or basically miscalculations.
Thank you very much, Marius, and that's actually our time. So thank you all for joining us and being with us until the very end. I would like to thank our distinguished speakers. It was great to listen about the outcome of the research, and I really can't wait to see the publication on our website. Normally, I would ask for everybody to join me in a round of applause, but today I can only ask for you to click this like button. So I'm asking you to do that. As I already mentioned, this is the last webinar before the summer break, but we will be back. If you have any idea about the future topics, please write a proposal in the comments section, and we promise to look at it and analyze it. So please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn for latest updates, and visit our website stratcomcoe.org to see our publications, where we post our majority of our publications. So again, when you're watching this not live, so hit that bell icon and be notified about our content. We are not posting regularly, but when we are posting, it's worth to watch. So thank you all, and see you next time. And from Riga, over and out.